Okay, so as I said, the Monday classes are going to be reserved for going over the lecture material and then also answering any questions you might have. And then the second session, whether it ends up being Wednesday or Thursday nights, will be purely Q&A. I'm more than happy to retouch on topics, but I don't have a planned out formal lecture for these days. It's just really here to help you guys. So hopefully you had enough time to go through the homework questions, and you can ask questions, and we can go through them and clarify anything that you might still be struggling with. So who wants to start us off with the first question?
Yes, I can if I can get over there. It wasn't such a bad question.
Yeah.
Some of them can be a little vague, for sure.
Yeah, I think like one of the third ones was a little more vague than that one. But okay, so you're at the hospital and they got that screening procedure. This is question 2.2, I think.
Yep.
And it's a new screening procedure. So what I do when I look at these questions, read it, and then I just pick out the terms and try to identify,
Sure.
what's the purpose of that study. It looks like it's an observational study because there are people who are coming into the hospital, and if they've suffered a stroke, they might be given a new blood clot medication. And they say that it's crucial to be given that medication within 12 hours after the stroke began. So they're doing all that stuff, doing the workup and whatnot. And the observational study was that it appeared to be very successful because in the first year, there was a higher rate of total recovery by some patients,
right,
in comparison to the others. So basically it's an observational study, and the explanatory variable is this new screening procedure.
Or more specifically, the new blood clot medication.
With a new blood clot medication.
Yep,
being
exactly.
Yeah. It's a tandem, like, right?
Sure.
You got to have one to get the other, I guess. But
you could really say that the explanatory variable is specifically the new blood clot medication, because it really comes down to whether or not they got that medication.
Oh, okay. All right. Very good. So I'm just going to erase the new screening procedure, and it's the new blood clot medication. Okay. So then the confounding variable, and I guess it's important to understand what is confounding to answer that correctly. But it would be the new blood clot medication being administered within the 12 hours after the stroke. Is that right?
Usually your explanatory variable can't be your confounding variable. So let's think about this the way you were talking about it, where why would we do this? We want to know if this new medication is effective or not, right? Okay, so if you were going to set up an experiment or a study to determine if this new blood clot medication worked or was effective, describe how you would go about doing that. Forget what this scenario is saying. You're now running this hospital and you want to determine if this new blood clot medication is effective or not. What would be the ideal way in which you would design a study to do that? Dr. And take away all ethics. Emily, go ahead.
Oh, yeah.
Sorry to jump in there. I just wanted to get you while you're on that particular thought. I read that as that the screening procedure was what they were trying to measure. So I put the screening procedure as the explanatory variable, because it looks like they're trying to test the screening procedure, and then I had the blood clot medication as the confounding variable.
Yeah, and a lot of students have that same problem, and it's because it's not worded really well. But if you think about it from the standpoint of what's going on and what's really changed from last year to this year, is that they get this new blood clot medication. The patients were screened last year the same way that they're screened this year. So when they talk about this new screening procedure, really the only thing that has changed is in this screening procedure, when they look at a patient and they determine that that patient is suffering from a stroke, then they administer this new medication. So that new medication is the thing that's being changed, right? It's the thing that you have control over, ergo it's the explanatory variable.
Yeah. And naturally I would think that way because like that's the treatment. So it's almost like you want to measure the treatment pre and post. Naturally, that's where my mind wanted to go. But as I kept rereading the question, I'm like, they're
Yeah.
asking the result of the darn screening procedure. So I need to be reflective of that.
Yeah.
So I am glad we're having this conversation.
Yeah, it's a poorly worded question, and you know, you are basically testing the effectiveness of the new screening procedure, but from the description they give us, the only aspect of the screening procedure that we know is this new blood clot medication. So really, the new screening procedure and the new blood clot medication are one and the same, because in our eyes, we have no idea what else is happening during that screening procedure. So even if we wanted to argue that the explanatory variable was the new screening procedure, well, as far as we know, that's just the blood clot medication, because that's all, you know, we don't know what else is going on during that screening procedure
Right.
because
Okay.
they don't describe it. But it really is a poorly worded question, and because the only thing that is basically changed from last year to this year, and the only thing that we would really want to test the efficacy of would be the blood clot medication. So that becomes our explanatory variable. And then with that in mind, if we wanted to design, again, get rid of ethics, take yourselves out of the real world. Don't think about this as being in a real hospital. Think about this as, you know, a thought experiment. If you could design a perfect experiment with this blood clot medication, what would that look like?
Okay.
Well, wouldn't you have your patients randomly assigned to two groups? One group that gets
Right.
the blood clot medication and one group that gets a placebo, right?
Yep.
Sure.
Mhm.
Now, ethically, we can't do that. That's why we have to talk about this in the abstract. You can't just, you know, ethically not give your patients a medication. So, at least without, you know, telling them that they're in some sort of study, right? So when people volunteer for studies, they have to be told that you might be getting the medication and you might be getting a placebo, you know, that kind of thing. So if we wanted to design it that way, you know, that would be the ideal way, but that's not how it's designed. All they're doing is they've instituted this new screening procedure where they get this new blood clot medication, and then they're going to you know, measure the success of it by, I don't know, you know, how many patients still suffer a stroke, maybe the severity of the strokes, whatever. They have some sort of measurement criteria that they're going to collect, and then they're going to compare that to the previous year. Well, what's the problem with that? What are the confounding variables? You know, what are things that could muddy up the waters, that could make the blood clot medication look either more or less successful than it actually is? What are all the things you can't control for between last year and this year?
Yeah, so you could reference several compounding variables, right? It could be managed care coverage of the treatment, and the lack of the coverage could cause medication adherence issues.
Sure.
Um, you know,
And
just
even in a general sense, without getting into specifics, we're
I would
talking
say
about, go ahead, Mary.
pre-existing conditions, how severe the stroke was when they came in, their age, sex, race. I can think of all different kinds of things that would be variables
Right.
and confound me.
right. And because we're comparing basically patients this year to patients last year, there are so many things that are different, that we can't, you know, we can't eliminate the effects of all that confounding. So basically, the confounding variable in general is just the year in which they were admitted to the hospital. Because if they were admitted last year versus this year, well, last year you could have had some crappy heart surgeon doctors, right? And then you got better doctors this year. Or last year there could have been all sorts of differences between then and now. So there's going to be, like you said, there's going to be way too many things that are going to confound it. And then in addition to that, yes, there are all those things that you guys listed that would be confounding variables, even if we were doing our entire study this year. You know, like you said, pre-existing conditions and the age of the victims, the ethnicity of the victims, their weight, right? If they're smokers, if they're overweight, there's just so many covariates and things that you would have to control for. And that's why the only way to really know whether or not this blood clot medication is effective would be to run a clinical trial where you put people in control groups and the treatment groups, and then you control for all those other variables, right? You make sure that your control group and your treatment group have relatively similar spreads of people. Now, that doesn't mean that everybody has to be healthy non-smokers who aren't fat in both groups. It just means that if you have a fat smoker in one group, you should have a fat smoker in the other group, you know, that kind of thing. And then that can help to eliminate those variables because you can kind of pair them up and look at the differences from one to the other. So, but in the context of this, the confounding variable is really just the year in which the patients were admitted, because from last year to this year, there's going to be too many differences. And the only way we could eliminate the effects of that confounding variable would be, like I said, randomly assigning the stroke patients to either getting the new blood clot medication or a placebo.
Dr. M, excuse me,
Yes, Leroy.
would socioeconomic conditions be
A covariate?
a compounding factor also?
Absolutely, absolutely. Yeah, because richer people, you know, have better access to better health care. Usually they have a better diet, right? So it leads to that kind of thing. So yeah, all of those things would be confounding variables. But like I said, we don't have to get into the weeds and list all the specifics. We can just say, in general, the confounding variable is the year in which the patients were admitted, because that basically takes care of everything under one big umbrella, because we know from one year to the next, too much crap has changed and there are too many other, you know, things going on. So it's just, it's a terrible study.
All right, so let's see. We got all these right. Explanatory variable. It is the new blood clot medication?
So the explanatory is the new blood clot, the confounding is the year in which it was administered, and the only way to eliminate that confounding would be to randomly assign your stroke patients to either the new blood clot medication or a placebo. And then all those other things that you guys mentioned are absolutely valid as well. We just don't
And that's not ethical.
we just don't need to get, yes, no, it's not
Yeah.
not ethical at all. And we don't need to get into all those details with all those other things.
So I have a question.
Yes.
So
Motolani, is that how to pronounce it?
yeah, that's how you pronounce it.
Okay.
I was just coming up with my answers to these questions, I was just wondering in my head if you actually want specific keywords in those answers. I mean, those ones that don't have single word answer or one word answers. Do you actually want a certain type of keywords, or you don't mind what kind of explanation we give, so long as we hit the point?
You can write it out, you know, the explanatory variable equals new blood medication. The confounding variable equals year in which the patients were, you know, you could do kind of that thing. You could write it up in a short little paragraph narrative, right? You're basically, because you're basically answering three questions. What's the explanatory? What's the confounding? They kind of want to know why it's the confounding. So you know, it's good to have kind of a sentence explaining why that the year in which they were admitted is the confounding variable, and then you're supposed to explain how to eliminate it. So that whole thing can be done in probably 4 sentences if you want to
Okay.
write it all up in sentences.
Okay, I was the describe in front of it was throwing me off a little bit, so yeah, that's a little help.
Yeah, and the same goes for part B. You know, part B is going to have probably 4 or 5 sentences to explain the whole thing. Who wants to jump in and tell us what the explanatory variable is in part B?
I think it's the use of the SAT software.
Yes, exactly. When we just say the software program itself is the explanatory variable. because that's what we're testing, right? We're testing for the effectiveness of the software program. So you can see a pattern. The thing that we want to know whether or not it works is our explanatory variable. We want to know whether or not the blood clot medication works. Bang, it's our explanatory variable. We want to know whether or not this software program helps improve scores. Bang, that's our explanatory variable. Okay, the confounding variable before was the year in which they were admitted, because that has a huge effect on what's going on. What's the confounding variable here with the software?
Improved scores?
Nope. Good guess.
I
Think about what would affect whether or not the students scored better or worse, that is not really related to just the software.
The student's
studied
current
harder?
level of intellect.
Right, exactly. And so couldn't we say that the confounding variable is the fact that the students were allowed to choose whether to stay after school for an hour to use the software program or not?
Yep.
Because like you said, the motivation level of the student is now going to have a huge bearing on that, because the student who's motivated enough to stay after school for an hour to use the software is probably going to be a student who's motivated enough to study on their own and probably would do better than the other students, regardless of whether or not they use the software.
Yep.
So that's what we're looking for when we're talking about confounding variables, is the fact that there are other things that are going to inflate the results or deflate the results that have nothing to do with the software or whatever the explanatory variable is. So rather than letting them choose, how could we eliminate the effect of that confounding variable?
Offer more choices.
Or do it
Offer
during the
more
day when
times.
they were all in there in class.
Okay,
Make
or
it mandatory for them to use the software?
think more like an experiment.
Offer comparable software?
Close.
Or have some of them do it and some of them not do it.
There you go, Mary. Just like
Oh.
before, we would want to randomly assign some students to use the software and the rest to not. So you'll see this pattern, right? The only way to truly get rid of confounding variables is to, instead of having, you guys even said it, both of these are observational studies. Observational studies will always have confounding variables, because as an observational study, the researcher doesn't have full control over everything. Oftentimes, they don't even have full control over the damn explanatory variable, let alone all the other factors that could be confounding variables. So the only way to eliminate those confounding variables is to change it from an observational study into an actual experiment.
Experiment,
And,
yeah.
and an experiment always has what? A treatment group and a placebo group, right? So the only way to get rid of those confounding variables would be to randomly assign some students to stay after school and use the software, while the other students stay after school and just learn the more traditional way, right? Like they're sitting in a group working on worksheets, or being lectured to by a teacher or something like that. Are you starting to see kind of the correlation and the matchups between these two questions?
I certainly am.
Excellent. Thank you, Mary. All right. Any other questions on 2.2?
I think we're good.
Okay. Are there any questions on 2.7?
I had a general question about 2.7 as it applies to population of interest.
Yeah.
I don't know how specific to be with that.
Yeah,
So,
I'm glad you brought that up, because those questions can be very vague. You have to kind of really look at the wording of the question, right? So in this case, the circuit judges in this rural county are considering a change in how jury pools are selected. They asked the administrator of the courts to assess the county residents' reaction to changing the requirement, blah, 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 from the current requirement, blah, 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 right? So the administrator sends questionnaires to a random sample of 1,000 people from the list of registered voters in the county and receives responses from 253 of them. So what is the population of interest? Well, you know, we're getting a random sample of 1,000 people who are registered voters in that county. So really, if we got some insight into those 1,000 people, how general could we go with those insights? How, you know, how could we expand that out when we're talking about the population? How big could we go? Could we then say that that's going to tell us how the entire country feels? No. Would that tell us how everybody in the state feels? No. Wouldn't that only tell us what the residents of that county feel?
Mhm.
So that's our population of interest, the residents in the county. And you could be more specific. You could say the adults in the county. You could really even say all registered voters in the county, but because that's how they got their sample. But from the context of the question, you can see that they're trying to change the requirements from the current requirement of all registered voters to a new requirement of all registered voters plus all residents with the current driver's license. So the population of interest is really just all adults in the county, because you're assuming that every adult is either registered to vote or has a driver's license or possibly has both, right?
So what about potential jurors in the county?
Yeah, that would be a perfectly fine. Yeah.
Okay.
And when I grade these things, I'm not going to be, you know, a word Nazi and go, oh, no, this is wrong. Anything that's basically talking about the residents in the county is correct.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. Okay, are we good on the others? We know what the sampling frame is. We know possible biases and all that kind of stuff.
No, so this is Kathy. And,
Yes,
and
Kathy.
so is the sampling frame the 1,000 people?
Well, the sampling frame is not the sample itself. The sampling frame is where that sample came from. So where did those 1,000 people come from?
They're mommies and daddies.
Well,
They're
no,
registered voters.
registered voters. There you go, Mary. Thank you. Yes, registered voters. So the sampling frame is all registered voters.
So
But I would think that the registered voters are also the part of the 1,000 people that was sent the survey to. So I think I should think that the 1,000 voters should be correct. Should be correct too.
No, because that's the sample, not the sampling frame. The sampling frame is the group of things from which you are sampling. You took a sample of 1,000 people from the list of all registered voters in the county. Therefore, the sampling frame is the list of all registered voters in the county. If you went down to the local grocery store and just asked everybody who walked out of the grocery store how they felt about it, then your sampling frame would be all grocery shoppers. Do you see what I'm saying? Even if you only got 16 people to answer your survey, the sampling frame would be everybody who shops at that store on that particular day, kind of thing.
It's a subset of the population.
Well, the sampling frame is just what you're sampling from.
Yeah, okay.
And the sample itself is the actual things that you got from that sampling frame.
Okay.
Now, the sampling frame can be a subset of what you're interested in. So in this case, right, our population of interest is all residents in the county, but our sampling frame were only the registered voters in the county. So that is a subset of the population of interest, but that's not always the case. So I don't want you to think that it's always a subset. Just think of it in generalities. The only thing we can say about a sampling frame, right? The only truth of every sampling frame in the world is that it is simply the group of objects from which you are sampling.
All right.
Dr. M, for C, tell me if I'm putting two things together that don't go. So when it says what possible biases, is that meant to be defined based on the 4 categories of experimental error?
It can be, but there's a very obvious one here. What's the most obvious bias with this question?
Nobody replying.
Well, yes, and what do we call that?
A non-response.
Right, survey non-response bias.
Survey non-response bias. Yep.
And more specifically, we even call it just the voluntary response bias, right? Anytime you send
Oh.
out surveys and ask people to voluntarily respond or not, that's a bias.
Oh, got it.
Yeah. And that's really the only bias in this example that we know of, right? There could be more, but from the information we're given, that's the only bias that we know exists.
Well, they didn't survey unregistered voters though, right? There could be unregistered voters with driver's license.
Yeah.
Right. But remember, again, you're putting the cart before the horse. That's not part of our sampling frame, so we don't care.
Okay.
That can't be part of our bias, right? Our bias is only based on how we sample what we sample.
Gotcha. Thank you.
Yeah.
I still have a question about that because I think a bias would be if they're registered to vote, they obviously have some kind of interest in politics.
Exactly.
So,
Yeah, but that has nothing to do with whether or not they want to serve on the jury.
oh, you think it does not? See,
God,
I would
no.
think they would be more inclined to be on a jury if they were registered to vote and at least had that much interest in what went on in their county.
I've been on jury duty and it sucks.
Yeah, I can tell you that jury pools have absolutely no correlation to interest in politics and voting.
Isn't jury pools in general selected from registered voters anyway? So
Yes.
that's the only ones they pull.
Pretty much. Yeah, pretty much most jury pools are pulled from registered voters. Yes, that is true. And I know of quite a few people in my life who refuse to register to vote just so that they'll never be asked to be on a jury. And they still care about politics, but their willingness to be on a jury outweighs it. So there's no strong correlation between those two. It's a good thought, but we don't want to read too much into stuff with these questions. We want to just stick with what is there and what is obvious. And it's the voluntary response bias. Now, if you had put something about, jury pools and registered voters, I wouldn't have taken it off for that. I mean, that's fine. You're thinking, and that's great. But it's not, it's a great idea, but it can't be proven true or false from the limited information we're given. You're basically just making an opinion. I think registered voters are, obviously more interested in politics, ergo they would have an opinion about being on a jury or not. Okay, that's a good, that's your opinion, but can you back it up with anything? So that's my point. Does that make sense?
Yes, I was
Yes, it
thinking
does.
is when I thought of the word bias, I thought, what's wrong with this thing, and it's,
Yeah, exactly.
but it's not necessarily what's wrong with it, but it's how it relates to what you were expecting your sample to be, I think, right? So
Right. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
I mean, we always must look for potential biases in our samples, and they almost always exist. And then the idea is there any way we can eliminate them? And if we can't eliminate them, then we have to try and control for them. And if we can't control for them, then at the very least, we need to acknowledge them and report them, right? So if we were the ones running this and we came back with the results and we presented the results to the circuit judges, we would have to say, now, judges, remember, there's a voluntary response bias here with this data because we only got this data by sending out surveys to registered voters. We only got 253 back from the 1,000 that we sent out. So you can see right there that there's a large non-response bias, and plus there's just the ever-present voluntary response bias because the type of people who would not respond did not respond. So it's that kind of thing where you just have to make sure that anybody who is looking at your results is made aware of those biases.
Do you think, Dr. McBride, there could be a bias of social desirability too with the respondents because they're responding to something that could be in the public domain, so they run the risk of that as well?
Yes, absolutely. Depending on you know, how much privacy you promised your respondents, yeah, it would be something that we, you know, wouldn't want to discuss here because we don't know whether or not it's kept private. But yeah, in a real world setting, right? If you're starting to think about things that could screw up your data, absolutely. That's one of the main reasons why polls in general are wrong, is because when you're standing there in front of another human being and they're asking you who you voted for, well, you might not want to admit who you voted for.
Right.
And so you might lie. And the same thing goes for if, you know, if they asked you how you voted on a certain topic, like they're trying to figure out whether or not a certain proposition is going to pass. Well, again, you might not want to admit how you voted on that proposition. You might not want to just say, no, I'm not going to answer your question. Instead, you're just going to lie, right? So yeah, so there's a lot of reasons why surveys are crap. They just are, statistically speaking. But like I said before, they're a necessary evil, because in a lot of instances, they're the only way we can get the data that we want to get. But anybody with a brain needs to understand that the results you get from it are crap. You know, they're the best we can get, but they're still crap. Like you better not bet your house on it, right? It gives you an idea of what might be happening, but I mean, it's just so, it could be so wrong that it's oftentimes, I always feel like it's not worth the time or the energy or the money to do them. But that's my opinion. Okay, 229. Are we good with that one? Population of
Yep.
interest and all that stuff? Any
Yep.
questions on that one? Okay. How about 211? We good with 211?
Sorry, I didn't mean to say yep on 2.9. I
Yeah,
actually thought we were
seriously.
still talking about 2.7. So I
2.7,
would
sorry.
love to go back to 2.9.
2.9. Population of interest.
The Yale alumni class of 1924.
Exactly, and that's how specific we want to be. And even we could say possibly just the men, because you can see they said the average Yale man.
Oh, I didn't catch that.
Yeah,
Oh,
those sexist bastards, right?
oh.
Yale man.
Although back in 1924, there probably were very few females going to Yale to begin with, because it was a pretty male-dominated kind of old boys school at that point. All right, what about were the techniques used in selecting the sample likely to produce a sample that was representative of the population of interest? Yes or no?
I put no, because it's really only going to sample the people who have kept their addresses current with Yale.
Yes, exactly.
Which
I
are
agree.
probably ones that are donors or interested in the
Right.
school.
Exactly.
Maybe have a little bit more
Exactly.
money than others.
Right,
Yeah,
exactly.
there's a 24-year gap.
Right, very good. Yeah, very good, absolutely.
Oh yeah, the ones that are still alive.
Yes, and more specifically, like you said, the ones whose addresses are still on file 25 years later, right? How many people do you know that either haven't moved in 25 years or have kept up with their alumni association for 25 years, right? That's a pretty specific demographic. Okay, part C. What are the possible sources of bias in the procedures used to obtain the sample?
Non-response bias.
There you go. Yeah, exactly. That voluntary response bias is always going to be a problem. What other things could you think of?
Sampling only those who stayed in touch with the school, like not trying to reach out with anyone who has not contacted them.
Right. Okay. Now let's think about biases as far as the data is concerned, right?
How
What
do
did
you
they?
verify their salaries?
Thank you. Don't you think that people are probably going to lie about their salary?
Oh,
And even if they don't lie about their salary, don't you think they would round it? You know, like somebody's not going to say, I make 63,000. They're going to say, I make 65,000 a year. You know, those kind of things.
Mhm.
And so with that in mind, you know, most people would probably round their salaries to at least the nearest 1,000 and probably even the nearest 5,000. So based on that, do you believe that the estimate is correct when they say it's 25,111?
I put no because you can't even verify these salaries in the first place. So
Yeah,
what if they make 60,000 and they say they make 115,000? So
exactly. So that alone tells us it's probably not accurate. And even if they did, you know, kind of tell the truth, like I said, they're going to round, which is going to make everything, you know, off. And then it also means that how the hell did they get something that ended in $111? The only way that would work is if they had a certain number of respondents that when you divided by that number, you would get something that ended in 111, which seems like you'd have to have like a 9,
Mhm.
29 people or something like that. But anyhow, I think we get the gist. Okay, any further questions on 2.9? Hey, can everybody go on mute unless you're going to say something? Because there's a lot of background noise coming through.
On 2.9D though, is an okay answer saying there's no way to know?
No way to know what, whether or not it's
Too high,
accurate?
too low, or nearly correct?
Well, you don't want to just say there's no way to know. You would just say that you could say there's no way to know, but if you had to guess, is it too high, too low, or nearly correct? What would you, if you had to choose one of those three, what would be the more likely answer?
The most likely is it's too high.
Yes, exactly. And that's what I would say, and I would explain
Okay.
why.
Okay.
Yeah. All right,
Okay.
anything else on 2.9? Okay, 2.11. Sorry, I think I might have just muted somebody who was going to talk.
211 is what you went over Monday night with our notes.
Yes,
Pretty much verbatim, I think.
I believe I did. Yes, I just want to make sure nobody had any questions on it because I did get some submissions, early submissions that still got a couple of these wrong. So
Simple random sample for the first A,
yeah,
stratified random sample B, 9
and-
regions and
yep.
45,000, 9 regions, 5,000 members.
And therefore C would have to be
Cluster.
You got it.
B
Okay.
is a cluster.
Yep. Very good. Okay.
And you
So-
want us to tell you why. Like cluster because the sample was all the members of that group.
Exactly.
Okay.
Very good. 213. Any questions on this one?
Do you want us to cite our textbook on homework like this?
No.
Okay.
Thanks for that.
Yeah. A is usually
Yeah.
A is usually pretty straightforward for everybody. They usually can figure out what A is supposed to be, but most people get B wrong. A lot of people think B should be stratified or cluster sampling, and that is not the case with B.
I thought it was random.
Yes, it should be just simple random sampling. And the reason why it has to be simple random sampling is because you have no idea what the location of the containers are. So you can't stratify them and you can't cluster them. So basically what you would just have to do is just keep randomly sampling landfills, right? And places in landfills or whatever until you found 100 containers. And that would be the only way to tackle B.
But so is a cluster, is the answer to a cluster?
No, A should be stratified.
Crap. Thank you.
Because you want to stratify them by type of degree and then sample within each of those degree types. And that's the only way that would allow us to basically examine the employment status for each degree type and compare amongst them.
Okay, I think I'm totally doing that wrong then, because for A, I had simple random, and B, I had stratified, and C, I had cluster.
Oh no, that you're yes, that's 211. We're talking about 213.
Oh, okay, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry.
That's okay. All right, any questions left on 213? Okay, the biggie, 216. What are the factors?
I think it's D1, D2, and the placebo.
Well done. Nice job, Mary. Exactly. The factors are basically the things that you, well, that's technically factor levels. The factors is just in generality the type of drug, and then the factor levels would be D1, D2, and placebo.
Oh, I put that there were no levels. So factors are the drugs and the levels are those three.
Yes. So the
Okay.
factor is just the type of drug. When they say factors, it just means that you could have more than one factor, but technically we only have one factor. We basically have one explanatory variable, and it's the type of drug given, and that's our factor. And then what are the levels of that factor? D1, D2, and placebo. And then what would the blocks be?
I think I picked H 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6, and then the D1 or the blocks. The way I'm looking at it is blocked in D, D1, D2, D2, and then placebo, placebo. So they're grouped by drug 1, drug 2, and placebo.
Well, okay, so those are factor levels. The blocks is
Oh, the
how,
10. You got 10 different blocks. Is that right?
yeah, you've got 10 hospitals. So your
10
hospitals are your
hospitals, right?
blocks.
Hospital. Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Blocks for the hospitals.
Blocks
I
are just the
wrote that.
hospitals. Yeah.
I was just looking at my diagram that I tried to.
Yes. So
It's
just the hospitals are the blocks.
Okay.
Okay. What are your experimental units?
The patient.
The patients. Very good, Mary.
Oh, I thought it was the ward. I'm sorry. I'm
Well,
glad.
the book says wards.
Oh, okay.
I
It is the
think
patients
it's
in
the
the ward.
patients, because the experimental unit to me is what's being experimented on, what the factors are being measured on, right? And you're measuring the effectiveness or the response to the drugs on the patients. And so that brings us then to the measurement units. So if the patients are our experimental units, what are the measurement units? What are being measured?
The degree of illness after the treatment.
Exactly. Degree of illness. Very good. Okay. Replications. How are we replicating this experiment?
I thought it was the 10 different hospitals.
Right. And more specifically, what are they doing in those 10 different hospitals?
The full experiment in each hospital in 10 different, in 10 different hospitals.
Right. And how are they administering the drugs specifically?
6 days of treatment.
Right. And then what are they doing with each drug? Two wards. So there are 2 wards per drug in each of the 10 hospitals. So there are technically 20 replications.
Whoa.
So replications basically means how many times are you redoing the experiment, and then explain how you're doing it, right? So they have 2 wards per drug. So each hospital, they're going to basically have 6 wards in each hospital, because in hospital A, they're going to have 2 wards getting D1, 2 wards getting D2, 2 wards getting a placebo. And then hospital B, the same thing, right? So you have 2 wards per drug in each of the 10 hospitals. That's the replication. That's how it's being replicated over and over and over again. Okay, covariates. Similar to confounding variables, right? Is another way of saying it is covariates. Things that could affect. Go ahead.
I was just going to say other illnesses present in the patients.
Sure, absolutely. What other things?
Isn't it the age, BMI, blood pressure?
Yes, and the degree of illness.
Yeah.
Yep, that's it.
Okay.
Those are the covariates. Okay, treatments.
I thought it was D1, D2, and the placebo.
Exactly. Don't overthink it. That's exactly what it is. Yep. Yep. That's it. Okay.
Say again the covariates, because
The
I
covariates
couldn't.
are the things that are being measured along with your experiment, and that's age, BMI, blood pressure, and measure of degree of illness. So age, BMI, blood pressure, and degree of illness. Those are your covariates, because those are the things that are being recorded from each patient. Right? Once they, upon entry into the hospital, those are measured. And we do that so that we can control for that, right? So we can basically enter that data into the regression equation and see and eliminate those pieces so that we can see what the true effect of just the different drugs are. Okay, 22. What do we think? Is it a randomized complete block design or a Latin squares design?
I'm a vote for randomized complete block.
All right, we got 1 vote for randomized complete block. What else do we got?
Randomized design.
All right, we got 2 votes for
Complete.
randomized.
Dr. M, I hope it's a randomized design because I don't know if I've ever seen a Latin format before.
Yes, it's a randomized complete block design, and it's blocked by what?
Do you mean the 2 factors?
Well, that's the 2-factor structure, but what is the blocking?
Ugh.
Read the experimenter wanted 8 replications of the experiment. Since conditions in the kiln vary somewhat from day to day, the experiment was conducted over an 8-day period.
So is a block a day?
Yes, very good.
Okay.
Think of it, before the blocks were the hospitals, all the places, all the different places where the experiment was done. Here it was done over 8 different days, so each day was a block. And then within those blocks, we have a 2-factor structure because we're looking at 2 things. What are those 2 factors that we're looking at?
I know one's a level of thickness.
Right, the thickness of the glaze, and what's the other thing?
Isn't it? It's not the glaze?
Yeah, the type of glaze, exactly,
Right,
because
okay.
he's got 4 different glazes applied at 2 different thicknesses.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah, so type of glaze and thickness are your 2 factors. All right, good. 23. What's better, design A or B, and why?
Okay, I thought B was better because they all taste them, but they have to taste them with a clean palate.
Okay. Yes, that's true. You'd want them definitely to have some sort of palate cleanser in between. So what would be the problem with A? I agree, and so does the book. B is the better one because they all taste all 5 recipes. So what's wrong with A?
The
Because
customers,
each of, oh, go ahead, ma'am.
sorry. Well, I mean, isn't it because the customers are only tasting one recipe? How can they compare anything?
Exactly. It's kind of
Okay.
stupid, right? Yeah.
That's just a score. It's just a scoring methodology to see which
Right.
scores higher.
Right.
No.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So A is completely silly. It makes no sense whatsoever for what you're trying to figure out. Yeah. Very good. Okay. So the last one, 31. What's our population of interest?
The entire state.
More specifically,
Ooh, I guess the automobile tires located in the entire state.
or just the cars themselves. But yes,
Okay,
exactly.
okay.
Yeah.
Oh,
And then what's our sampling frame?
2,000 cars,
Nope.
500 cars.
That's our sample. Sampling frame is what we sample from. We got those 500
Oh, all the
cars.
cars then. Okay.
More
So the sampling
specifically,
frame is all the cars in the state.
nope.
Registered.
Registered cars. There you go.
Oh, register. Okay.
Yep. And registered in the last 4 months, right? During each of the 4 selected months, the researcher randomly selects 500 cars from a list of registered cars in the state and then measures the tread thickness of the 4 tires on each of the selected cars. So I know it doesn't sound like it from the description, but it sounds like they are looking at cars that were only registered during those 4 months. But you could still just say registered cars, because I think most people wouldn't glean from that they are looking at just the ones that were registered in that time frame. But anyhow, what biases, if any, can result from using the data from the study to obtain the estimated proportion of cars with an unsafe tread thickness?
Well, I would say the type of tire, the tire brands, what kind of weather patterns there are.
Well, all of those things
car
would still be fine, because you're randomly selecting cars. So you're going to get random selections of tire brands. You're going to get random selections of tire thickness, right? So that's because that's what we're looking for. We're testing for tire thickness. You're selecting cars during each of the 4 selected months. So each of the 4 seasons, right? So we're taking seasons out of it. What's the only couple things that really aren't being accounted for?
And not how people drive. I had that one on there too.
It's only, because we're trying to predict the average tread thickness for all cars in this state.
So the age of the tire,
Nope.
how many miles on the tire?
Nope, because that's all part of the selection process. Think about how the cars are selected and what might be left out.
What about the car make or car model?
Again, that's all going to be part of your random selection.
Oh, so unregistered cars?
There you go. Not all cars in the region are going to be registered. Right? So you're going to have cars on the road that necessarily aren't registered at all, or weren't registered, at the time of the data collection. Also, the time of year is going to, affect things, because some cars might, some people might leave the area during certain part of you have like snowbirds that get out of the area during the winter, so their cars aren't going to be on the road during that time. So there's all those kind of aspects, and of course the unregistered is really a problem, because what would you assume about the average state of well-being of an unregistered car? Right?
4.
Yeah. Wouldn't we assume that all unregistered cars would have a higher proportion of unsafe tire tread thickness than cars that are registered? There's a much more likely chance that an unregistered car is driving around on bald tires than a registered one. So that's going to skew your results. And that's it, guys. That's the entire set of homework. Any questions on any of those that we've gone through?
No, but thank you. That really helps a lot
Good.
to
Yeah.
go through them
Good.
and discuss
Yeah.
them together.
This is
Absolutely.
really helpful.
That's why I keep telling students to show up or at least watch the videos.
So how long does it take to start thinking this way?
Well, it can be a bit of a process. It can be. I mean, I have, it's funny, I get calls all the time from friends of mine that I went through grad school with that, you know, because I did my degree in math education, and there were a lot of people that we all went through the degree program together. We were all in different aspects of education. So I have friends who did science ed, math ed, you know, history ed, and all these other things. I get calls from them all the time, even though we all took all of the same advanced statistical courses. I still get calls from them all the time asking me to explain statistics to them. So the answer is it can take a lifetime. You know, I understand it because this is what I do. I studied this and I teach this. Until you turn around and teach it, you're probably never going to fully start thinking this way.
And next week we meet on Wednesdays.
Well,
Correct?
I did unfortunately post an announcement early that shouldn't have been posted. I had it on a delay, but the delay wasn't long enough. So if you saw that posting saying that we're meeting Wednesdays, that was just a mistake for something that it was an old post that I copied over, and I wanted to delay its posting to give me enough time to edit it before I post it for real. As it sits right now, I've got 20 out of 27 people have responded. At this point, I'm just going to say forget the other 7 people. They obviously don't want to play with us. So I'm going to analyze the data that I have right now. The data is showing Wednesday being slightly more popular than Thursday, but I have to actually take a closer look at it just because Wednesday at 8 has 13 versus 11 on Thursdays. It could be that these 2 people that are on the Wednesdays that aren't on the Thursdays can make Monday, but a lot of these people can't make Monday, right? So if I made it Monday, Wednesday, I'd have a lot of people who couldn't make any meetings, but if I made it Monday, Thursday, I'd have a few less that make Thursday versus Wednesday, but I'd have more people that can make at least one meeting. So it's that kind of thing. I have to.
Well, except that if we revamp our homework and give it to you by Thursday at midnight, so Wednesday gives us the next day to look at it and get, you know, I can do mine right now, but I'm not going to do the work as well as I probably would if I did it tomorrow.
Sure. I mean,
so I'm
Wednesday. Fine for that. If people prefer Wednesday, I'm fine with it. I felt like Wednesday was only 2 days after the first day, and a lot of people haven't had a chance to actually do enough work. I don't want to hold a Q&A on Wednesday and hear crickets from everybody when I ask for questions because half of you haven't even started the homework or have only done 3 or 4 of the questions, right? I don't want to have a Q&A session until everybody has attempted every homework question. So if the group wants to promise me that you will get all of your homework done or at least attempted in 2 days, then I'm more than happy having it Wednesdays. But that's why I normally push for Thursdays over Wednesdays. It gives everybody that extra time to get everything at least attempted, right? I don't expect you guys to have it done where it's all correct, but I expect them all to be attempted. Because if you haven't even started the homework question, then you have no questions to ask, right? So you have to have at least attempted every single homework question by the time we have our Q&A session.
So I have a question.
Yeah,
a quick question. Everything that we went over tonight,
yeah,
we pretty much have it formatted and it's in there. Do we still send it to you for a review or a glance over? Just to make sure we got it right?
If you want. Yeah, absolutely, if you want. But I mean, at this point, don't you think you could just submit it since I've pretty much given you all the answers?
Yeah, I
Yeah.
think so.
Yeah, I think so
Oh.
too.
I'm not that good at, I'm not that good at typist, but
Yeah.
I was trying to write quickly, but yeah, I'm okay with it. I'm good.
I'm fine with you guys still submitting it to me, but you could also just submit it for real. Either way is fine. But I think you should be fine.
Yeah, and this time we send it in to turn it in, right? It goes
No.
to turn it in.
No,
No?
you just submit it. I don't think there's if it goes to turn it in, it goes automatically. All you
Oh,
do
okay.
is just go to the assignments link and just go to its assignment and then submit it there, right? So you would click on homework 1, and then there'll be it'll look different than for me. For you, there'll be a little place where it says submit, and you just click on that, and then you upload your file.
Say, yeah, Dr. M.
Yeah.
Michael Davis here. Yeah, say, well, one thing I do appreciate your sense of humor throughout all this, and and I did get your soup Nazi joke that you made.
Oh, very good. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely.
Seinfeld.
Yes, from Seinfeld. Yes.
That was great. I'll just say one advantage perhaps with sending in this homework for you to check would be that we'd get to test out whether we're doing your formatting correct and whether we got that right.
That is a great point, Mike. Yes, Michael, that's a great point. Then why don't you guys go ahead and do that, just so we can make sure that you've got the labeling correct. That's a great idea.
Yeah, fantastic. And then, so one question I did have was in regard to APA format, in terms, because we've got, these are written answers tonight. Are we
No,
to indent?
Not
Okay,
at
we don't
all.
have to worry about that
I
for
don't
this?
care
Okay.
at all about APA formatting for the homework.
Okay, great.
For and really for any of it, because the critique, you are literally posting it to the discussion board, right? So there's not really a lot of APA formatting that goes on in a discussion board. The mini project is basically just a beefed up homework set where you just have to do more explanatory portions, where you explain how you got your answers and why. So there's more places where you kind of talk about why the results are what they are, but it's still more of a homework set. So it really doesn't have an APA kind of thing to it. Even though it says it's a quote unquote mini project, it's really just a bunch of homework questions with a theme. And then the final project, that's the only thing that really has any kind of possible APA formatting to it. But again, I don't care. I'm not going to pay attention to that part. It's because again, it's a bunch of questions that you're just answering, and then there's a scenario that you're coming up with, and a description of that scenario. So that part where you're coming up with a scenario, you could, in all honesty, write that up in APA format, because, and I'll mention it here, but I'll mention it again as we get closer to it. If you want to take a look at the final project next week, might be a good idea, just so you can kind of think ahead. There's a part of it where it asks you to come up with a research question scenario, like, name something that you want to research, come up with a question, discuss how you would collect the data, discuss the types of variables you would have, blah, 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 blah. There's all these bits and pieces. Well, students often have a really hard time with that, because they're like, because we're asking you to basically create everything that, it's a completely made up process. You're coming up with a research question, you're coming up with everything, so you could make up whatever the hell you want. Well, I always tell my students, well, don't just pull something out of your butt, come up with something that's actually related to your dissertation. So if you have a concept of what your dissertation topic is going to be, then use this as an opportunity to start fleshing out those parts of your dissertation, i.e., what is going to be your specific research question? And then based on that question, what would be the specific data you would want to collect? Okay, and then based on that, what's the specific technique you would use to collect that data? And then based on that, what are the specific types of analyses you would run on that data in order to answer that question? That becomes a much more powerful learning tool than just coming up with some arbitrary research question, out of thin air and running through those parts of the final project that way. So that's what I suggest everybody to do. And if you aren't far enough along in your in your work to already have a dissertation topic in mind, then at least pick something that you're interested in rather than just something random. Those would be my suggestions for the final project. And that would be the only part. If you wanted to write up those parts, the research question and all that stuff I explained, if you wanted to write that up in APA format, that would be good, because then you already have it for when you want to do it for real. You can literally just copy and paste it into your dissertation and then expand on it. 2 sentences becomes 4
Fantastic.
paragraphs, that kind of thing.
Yep. Thank you so much for those clarifications, Dr. M, and thank you for your sincere interest in everyone's learning process. I appreciate that.
No problem. That's what I'm here for. Thank you for recognizing that. I've had plenty of students in the past not. All right. Any other questions before we go?
Dr. McBride, real quickly, I think I got confused on 2.13a. Was that stratified?
Um, 2.13a is in fact stratified, yes, because you're gonna stratify them by each type of degree and then sample amongst each of the degrees, right? So you'll take a 5% sample from each of the degree types, and then that way you can compare each of the degree types.
Okay, I'm trying to think, if it was cluster, how would that be different?
Well, see, clustering, you would maybe cluster them by degree type, and then you would randomly select 2 or 3 of the degree types and then take a complete sample of each of those degree types. Clustering, remember, you put them in groups and then you randomly select a subset of those groups and then you sample that entire group. So if you group them by degree type and then just randomly selected 2 or 3 of those degree types and then sampled all of the people in those categories, you're missing all the other degree types.
Oh, okay, gotcha.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, of course. Anything else?
So I had a cluster, and I must have put it in wrong, for 2.13. Is that not
Which one?
right?
A or B?
B, I'm sorry.
No, you can't do cluster. You can't do cluster or stratified with B because you don't know the location of the containers. And if you don't know the location, how are you going to cluster them and how are you going to stratify them, right?
Okay.
So what you have to do is you just have to, you basically just do an exploratory. You're just randomly digging in a bunch of landfills until you find 100 containers.
That makes perfect sense.
Yep.
Thank you.
Of course. Anything else? All right. Thank you, everybody. Fantastic group. Lots of great questions. I love the interaction. Keep it up. And like I said, I will go through the data and see specifically if we're going to meet on Wednesdays or Thursdays. I still think leaning towards Thursdays is the better choice. But if you guys have strong opinions about Wednesdays, just let me know, and we can do Wednesdays instead. And I'll send that information out probably tomorrow when I get a chance to really look at it deeply. Okay. Good night, everyone.
Thank
Okay,
you.
Dr. M. Have a
Thank
good
you.
night.
Good
Thanks
night.
for everything.